Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carla Boyce, Head of VIP Banking here in Scotia Bank, Barbados. Welcome to our 15th episode of Scotia Insights Thought Leadership Series. Today, you're attending the first web episode right here in Barbados, but nowadays, you could be anywhere listening to us. The Scotia Insights original web series is meant to bring a sense of deep understanding and awareness. Our guest speakers share their expertise, and the audience is then encouraged to ask questions and engage in insightful discussions. Thank you for taking the time to join us as we discuss the new Caribbean economy and you. We'll explore where the global economy is going and what tourism-based economies have been doing to sensibly adjust to the pandemic. We'll also examine what's working well in Barbados, what major trends are developing within the context of our local community. So hopefully we share a few ideas that can strengthen all of your respective positions. It is my absolute pleasure to join you for today's thought-provoking discussion. Now allow me to introduce you to our panelists. Joining us from Ottawa, we have Jean-Francois Perrault, Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of Scotiabank. Jean-Francois joined Scotiabank in 2015 and is in his current role. He leads a team of economists to support Scotiabank's domestic and international business lines and clients from retail to capital markets, providing our senior executives, business lines, and clients with perspectives, insights, forecasts on economic, financial market, and policy developments. Prior to joining the bank, Jean-Francois held prominent roles with the federal government, the Bank of Canada, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Also joining us today from Toronto, we have Scott Stallmeyer, Portfolio Manager and Senior Wealth Advisor. Scott has over 15 years experience in building and managing business relationships with highly accomplished entrepreneurs, business owners, senior executives, and trustees. Born in Trinidad and Tobago, but living in Canada for over 20 years, Scott brings international and Caribbean insights to mold sound and applicable strategy. Scott and his team provide clients with the resources needed to enhance and protect their wealth, as well as optimize and preserve their legacy. Scott holds a professional MBA from McGill University, as well as the Chartered Investment Manager designation from the Canadian Institute. Without further ado, I'll now hand you over to Jean-Francois to kick things off.
Thank you very much, Carla, and thanks to everybody for dialing in, or I guess conferencing in today. You are fortunate to be in Barbados at present. As I think Carla just indicated, I'm in Ottawa, and it's been raining and snowing all day. It's been snowing actually for 3 days, so I very, very much envy all of you at the present time. We're talking about what's happening in the world, and I'll set up a little bit of the conversation that Scott is going to have with you in a little while. But I'm going to try and give you a bit of perspective on how things happening at the global level might be impacting you and your businesses as you think about the next year or so. So if we could maybe go to the first slide. Sorry, the next slide, this one. So, I mean, it's going to come as no surprise to anybody that the pandemic the virus has been a tremendously damaging economic shock to basically every single part of the globe. It's very rare in history that you have something that happens that affects every country, almost every individual. This is one of these things. And obviously, starting the first part of the year with, the virus beginning, in China, and then eventually kind of traversing or jumping across borders and coming into North America and Europe, or Europe and then North America. The reality was and is at this point in time that when the virus exploded onto the scene, if you will, there were no medical cures for it. There's no ability from the medical perspective to try and slow the spread of the virus. So as a result of that, you had governments around the world undertaking really quite extraordinary things to try and slow the spread of the virus, right? So they were shutting parts of the economy down. There were lockdowns, there were shut-ins, trying to distance people, putting in place laws that force people to stay in their homes in a range of countries around the world. And as a result of that, you saw a dramatic an absolutely dramatic decline in economic activity, which you can see from the chart on the left here. So this is an index of global manufacturing activity, looking at various countries, and you can see that big drop is basically when governments were saying, we're turning the switch off. We've got to try and control the virus, and this is how we're going to do it. Same time, you saw a dramatic move on unemployment rates, right? So as economies were shutting down, and they were literally shutting down, you had obviously millions and millions of individuals globally who found themselves out of work. So you saw, and you can demonstration again on the right-hand side here, historic increases in the unemployment rate, right? Just as an example for Canada, because it's representative of how things have happened elsewhere. We went in February, which was the month before the pandemic hit Canada, to the lowest unemployment rate in 45 years, to 3 months later in May, the highest unemployment rate in our history. So dramatic turnaround in economic activity. But of course, those lockdowns actually did work. So we did manage to slow the spread of the virus, and we did reopen economies. So as a result of that, you see this kind of V-shaped pattern in some of these charts. As you reopened, things skyrocketed back. No question about it. The rebound is just as historic as the decline was. And you see that on the manufacturing side, you see that on the unemployment side, you see that in a range of indicators. So that part of that was a result of, turning the switch on and off. Part of that was a result of policy measures. So if we can switch to the next page, please. One of the things that underpinned the recovery was the absolutely historical nature of the support packages that were rolled out globally. Obviously, as part of that, you had central banks cutting interest rates extremely rapidly. You had central banks putting in place financing facilities for markets. Central banks, in some cases, providing credit directly to companies. Absolutely massive and extremely rapid intervention by central banks to try and stabilize markets, because as you will recall, when the economy started to tank, when the virus was really a concern in the spring, there was very significant financial market turmoil. So central banks came in and did a whole lot of things to stabilize the situation, and that worked reasonably well. You also had fiscal policy, so fiscal authorities roll out, again, I'm using historic a lot and unbelievable, but historic and unbelievable stimulus packages. So these explosions in government debt resulting from truly unprecedented policy interventions. You can talk about various countries having wage subsidies, right? So governments actually paying a part of the salaries for firms, which, pre-pandemic would have been absolutely unthinkable. Well, there's a whole bunch of governments that are doing that now, including Canada's. You had, subsidized lending facilities put in place to support lending. You had rent relief programs. You had all kinds of innovative approaches to try and help businesses manage the downturn in as costless a way as possible, or to minimize the extent of the damage, and that was very, very costly. You also had on the household side, generally speaking, equally generous support mechanisms. So you had countries put in place, special payments for folks that were being unemployed. So, you had your typical unemployment insurance payments, and you got this extra bonus because of COVID. Certainly we had that in Canada, they had that in the UK, they had that in Europe, they had that in the US for much of the time. There were, deferral programs put in place by banks around the world. There were tax deferral programs rolled out by a range of countries, loan deferral programs. So it was a very, very active development on the policy side, which helped engineer a pretty significant rebound in economic activity in the third quarter, and it's ongoing. It's still going on. Obviously, the second wave is a concern. I'll talk about that in a second. But I want to just drill down on this aspect because it's meaningful in terms of what it means for a country like yours. So if we go to the next slide, please. And this kind of demonstrates, so this is using Canadian data, but again, you can make a similar chart for a large number of advanced economies, including the US, including the UK, which are your two principal trading partners on the tourism side. So what's happened with this stimulus is that it's landed in essentially individuals' bank accounts. So you saw a tremendous increase in global savings. You saw deposits rise across the world in a range of financial institutions. So as a result, you have households sitting on piles and piles and piles of cash, right? In Canada, for instance, just to give you an example, again, a Canadian example, from September of this year to September of last year, so the last 12 months, savings on the personal side in Canada have increased, personal deposits in the Canadian banks have increased by $132 billion, right? So this again, obviously you can see it from the chart on the right with the savings rate, like this is unprecedented from a historical perspective. And it means that households have money to spend when they want to do so. So for instance, you've seen around the world, things like car sales pick up dramatically. You've seen boat sales pick up. You've seen, sales of recreational vehicles pick up in North America. You're seeing sales of, TV, kind of discretionary things that people kind of enjoy. That's being financed in part by low interest rates, but in part by the massive amounts of cash that found itself in the banking system and in people's accounts. Now, what that means, hopefully, is that when there is a greater degree of confidence about, the state of the virus, when obviously the vaccine is being rolled out, when borders reopen, it means that there's a lot of discretionary income that can and is likely to be used to fulfill a pent-up demand for travel and other things, but travel in particular. And that's great news for a country like yours. So if we can maybe go to the next slide, please. So I guess I've already addressed some of this, but the question I think from your perspective is, it seems pretty clear from our perspective that there's going to be a surge in tourism when we open borders back up. Sometime middle of next year, maybe a little bit sooner or a little bit later. The question is going to be, which countries are best positioned to take advantage of that? And there, I think there's going to be a bit of a challenge, or a little bit of a fight, if you will. So we are optimistic about the way forward. The vaccine is definitely in place. The stimulus measures that I've indicated are powerful. They're keeping the economies going of your major trading partners, no question about it. That's good news, even if we are dealing with a pretty scary resurgence of the virus. But even here, the news isn't all that bad. The virus, by all measures, seems to be a bigger problem now than it was in the spring. But governments are approaching this much more smartly. Targeted measures, lockdowns in certain sectors in certain parts of countries. Some countries aren't even doing anything about it, like the US, which is basically kind of a free-for-all at this point in time. So governments aren't forcing the economic shock on the system that we experienced earlier in the fall. So that means that, mathematically, the virus is going to be less of a drag on economic activity than it has been. And in our mind, it's not going to be a sufficient drag on economic activity to delay and to eliminate the rebound that had been underway, that we expect will continue for many, many quarters. But there is no question that it's a risk. That risk is kind of time bound because the vaccine is around. The vaccine it will be available shortly, and will get rolled out globally. So it's just a matter of time before we end up in a world where we don't need to worry about the virus that much. But at present, the virus is, for the next few weeks, few months, is obviously a clear present danger to people's health around the world. The final thing that I'd like to point to is obviously we've had a U.S. election, and there's a new president in the U.S. It's almost certain that President like Biden, still, it's not yet president, is going to launch some kind of a stimulus program in the United States. So all those policy measures that I indicated earlier on, like these very significant support measures, Biden has indicated he wants to do more. He wants to do an infrastructure program. He wants to invest in various parts of the U.S. economy. If he gets to do a fraction of what he's able to do, or he wants to do, you're likely to see a stronger U.S. economy in 2021 than otherwise would have been the case, and maybe beyond. That means a stronger Canadian economy. It means a stronger global economy. Almost certainly means a stronger tourism sector and a stronger Bajan economy. So I would keep that in the back of your mind. Biden, as far as we can tell, is a pretty positive thing for the global economy. And of course, markets have reacted very, very positively to him as a proof point, if you will, in that thesis. Next page, please. So when we put it all together, this is kind of what it looks like. So here, the Canada-US forecasts are done by us. The Caribbean forecasts and the world forecasts are taken from the most recent IMF forecasts. But it's a striking graph, right? This year, every country is in the red. In fact, if we were to put all the countries in the world in here, there'd probably be only China and a couple of others that are not in the red. So generally speaking, big negative shocks everywhere. But if you look at 2021 and 2022, everybody's rebounding. It's just a matter of who's rebounding faster than others. Generally speaking, the size of the rebound is a function of how deeply you were affected. But it is our sense, and hopefully I've indicated to you why that is, that there's reason for optimism that next year is going to be substantially better than the year that we've just come out of, and in particular for tourism dependent economies like your own. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott, who can walk you through some additional considerations.
Thank you, JF. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and also a special thank you to the Scotia team in Caribbean South for putting this all together. For me, it's really been great to be a part of this and see Scotia's resources getting tied together for the benefit of an audience in Barbados. As Carla mentioned, I'm 22 years in Canada, but for the last 15 years, I've been working with select families throughout the English Caribbean. And of course, I grew up in Trinidad, so I've always had one foot in the region, and I'm pretty well tied into the nuances that are relevant to Barbados. So building on JF's comments, and the next section is really meant to bring it down a level. So coming down from the economy to focus on what's happening with major international companies, what trends have formed, who is doing things notably successfully. And from there, the goal is really to bridge what's working internationally into the context of Barbados for this audience on the call. Hopefully, as Carla mentioned, to leave you with a few ideas that can better position you within your own business environments. So just a quick thing before I dig in, disclaimer, as a wealth manager, portfolio manager, when we're typically looking at companies and analyzing them, we're thinking how they fit in with a broader portfolio. That's not what we're doing today. Really, the companies that we're referencing here are purely on their, a lot of them are excellent quality, but purely on their leadership in adapting through the pandemic. So it's not to say one is a buy or sell or anything like that. That's not the purpose of the call. So I think for me, and it fits in well with JF's conversation, the most important thing, if you take one thing from this, and those who are paying attention, this is just confirming what you already know or adding context to it rather, the customer is not gone. It's just lost, essentially. There's just barriers to access. So, the affluent high-income tourist is generally not losing their jobs through this, or meaningful net worth for that matter. Most international markets are actually positive year to date, which again, what JF would have indicated. So in the context of tourism, your target customer is not gone. There's just these new barriers that are complicating your access or their access to your product. So fortunately, in the case of Barbados, and really rather interestingly, as I was preparing for today, most of the best practices that the OECD, the IMF are listing out for economies like Barbados is in fact doing. So it was very encouraging to see that. And then of course, all of you are aware of the welcome stamp, which Barbados has now taken a leadership position in to switch this focus from, short stay or 1 week vacations or 1 day from cruise lines to a longer term stay. And so basically for you as a business community, you have these sensible adaptations happening at the country level. And your task, of course, is then to figure out the nuances below that within your relevant sectors. But again, to me, that mind shift, one, realizing that the customer's not gone, they just have barriers to deal with you, and realizing that the shift to longer duration stays is really brilliant. I read about 3,000 people have already participated, and I really hope this becomes a success story for Caribbean and the broader, for Barbados and the broader Caribbean. And then outside of tourism as well, other key recommendations we're seeing happening or being explored in Barbados: green energy. I know there's a lot of discussion and plans in that area. And then also digitization of the economy. I know that there's a number of things happening in Barbados along that side as well. If you could go to the next slide, yeah. So obviously a huge amount of the world is working from home right now. The key is really to understand that moving forward, some form of virtual work is here to stay. So 90 to 95% of employees that were surveyed across major North American firms claim that their ideal work situation is either fully or partially work from home. So that 95%, that's a huge, huge number. So business is going to change. And we're seeing that happen already. So I'll give you a quick example. There's a call center of a major competitor bank, not Scotia, but a competitor bank not far from us. And they had an issue with COVID, and so many people were affected, blah, blah, blah. So they closed down, or they closed the facility, and then shortly thereafter, they just decided to give up the lease, and their entire model for that segment of support staff, they've just put formal workstations in their home. So the investment has gone from paying commercial rents to a much smaller cost to put workstations in these categories of employees' home. And so, and the employees want it as well. So, and then another example, which really surprised me, typically slow-moving governments, even them are changing through this. So the city of Toronto announced in the last few weeks that they're going to downsize their office space by about 33%. We're talking a million square foot is what they currently rent. So, and it translates into $31 million in savings in the process. So great. But all of this is an opportunity for Barbados, and welcome, Stan, of course. So a few things that impact us all, regardless of industry, and then I'll go down into some key industries in Barbados in a second. Some opportunities and realizations. We are going through the lowest interest rates in history. So the wholesale rate of what the banks lend to each other is 0.14%, well, US dollars per year. So amazing and excellent for borrowers or those who are in a position to refinance their debt, which we have already seen, of course, in record numbers, as you would expect. And on the other hand, it actually is a challenge for fixed income investors. The second key thing, technology everywhere. We've seen rapid accelerations across all industries. I'm sure you've seen it too. Cloud computing, which means you need cybersecurity, e-sign documents, all of those things Scotia and all the banks have done. E-sign documents, we see a huge lift in our efficiency and of course a better experience for the clients. And these things, contactless payments, QR codes, and saw that a lot of that in Barbados on the restaurant menus, things like that. All of this makes business easier, it's more efficient, it's cheaper, the customers are happy with it. So with this whole change, there are a few benefits that apply to all of us and drawbacks, but just to highlight a few of the key benefits. One is speed. Business is moving incredibly faster now. There's no commute. You're already at work as you wake up. I'm chatting with you from my den. And actually, as I'm saying that, I'm picturing the jammed up roundabouts on the Errol Barrow and ABC Highway. So, but in international markets, meetings are happening 60% faster. Even us putting together this presentation today, which means decisions are happening faster, and all of which is better for business. And another one I thought that really resonates with Barbados is that all this work from home levels the playing field a lot more. So every employee is the same distance in a virtual sense from their headquarters, and similarly all customers. are the same distance virtually from you as a business person. So if the entire world forms this habit of connecting virtually, it doesn't matter really where you are. And Barbados is really in good position for this too, because that applies into talent. So you can, as a Barbados business, you can outsource and hire someone on the outside. And then, in our research, we have found that Barbados is known amongst the Caribbean for the highest quality education within the region. And that leadership is expected to continue. So Barbadians can now potentially get hired from the outside, but still live there, the same way that the Welcome Staff is planned to work. The other side of things is the challenges that there's a big shift, and so there are issues that people are experiencing work from home, just a few high-level ones that come to mind. Working from home, it means you sleep where you work. So a lot of people are having a hard time separating, and work-life balance is becoming an issue. I'm seeing that happening. Silos, I'm seeing that happening because silos are becoming more pronounced as there's just less opportunity to connect with people outside your immediate team in general if everyone's working from home. So, then there's health and wellness issues that can come up and due to isolation. So we need to be aware of that and try and counteract that and shape it sensibly. So as I said, now just drilling it down to a few key sectors in Barbados. As you see retailers, I would assume, like me, the very first thing you think of is Amazon. Yes, they've had a successful year, to say the least. Their revenue's up 56%, but it's happening everywhere in key companies. Walmart, the digital sales is up 80%. So it's all about the e-commerce, internationally, all about the e-commerce edge. And so thinking e-commerce edge, but in the lens of Barbados, there are ideas you can pull from these international companies and hopefully implement in your businesses. One that I found really stood out, and I've seen a huge change in my own experience, and we see it in our research as well, just on quality customer service reps dealing with issues, with client issues online. And so, for example, my own experience with Air Canada, there was a problem with my ticketing, and the guy responded to me by Facebook immediately. Within 5 minutes, a fairly complicated thing was solved. So he was well trained, he was great, and he had the power to solve my problem. And similarly, Scotiabank has actually done that, at least in Canada, that you can interact with anyone immediately and get a pretty high level problem solved quickly. So that's working really well. App usage for sales, I don't know if that how that would work in the context of Barbados, but for example, groceries, pharmacies, we're ordering groceries through our apps, and they have monthly subscriptions that gives you discounts or gives you automatic repeat orders on basic things. So Loblaw is a big Canadian grocery. They have Instacart, Walmart Plus. But in Canada, online grocery sales is up 200% for the year. And that's a big number. And then, so to single out Loblaw, is through the pandemic or for 2020, their revenues are up 11%. Another one that I know businesses would have been doing in Barbados, but it's just to give you some success stories, curbside pickup. So Home Depot, for example, their quarterly year-over-year revenues are up 23%. And they do have an online distribution, but the bulk of that was actually curbside pickup. So they've done really well with this. Same thing with Canadian Tire, exact same story. And they're up year-over-year 20% in revenues. So, fantastic success. Another one, it's really a future idea, but I think in a country like Barbados that's earning a rep of being able to be quick and nimble, why not? Walmart, Amazon, large Canadian groceries, Loblaw has just announced that they're exploring this, autonomous vehicles and drone delivery. Why not? So the other thing, the other sector we'll focus on is restaurants. There's some interest. I know I spent some time in Barbados in September, so I saw some basic things that were going on. Contactless pay, QR code, web menus. Internationally, companies like Restaurant Brands, who owns KFC, they're doing things like that. McDonald's and these major companies are doing that kind of stuff, and also are having successful years with earnings up. So again, thinking in e-commerce as the edge, what we're seeing internationally happening, I think a portion of this is happening in Barbados too, and if not, it should, is third-party ordering and delivery services. So Uber Eats, for example, have seen their activities up 135% per year. And that applies from mid-tier restaurant, high-end restaurant. You know, I'm thinking of the convenience stores in Barbados. It doesn't matter. They're all essentially doing this and able to distribute. So another really interesting thing that's taking place is high-end restaurants, and there are a few that come to mind in Barbados, but they are providing these self-cook meal kits. And so, you know, think of your most high-end restaurant, all that quality ingredients, quality food delivered to you in a beautiful package, and it has instructions on how to do it. And you and your loved ones sit down and do it at home. And I mean, I've done it with a couple of restaurants, and it's not exactly the same, but it pretty well it's close enough, and it really was a great experience, and I'm happy about that. So a lot of these restaurants are doing that. The other one, some have actually turned that into a subscription model. So there's a company called Good Food in Canada. It's actually a German company, but they just hired 500 people in Canada, for example. They distribute not a high-end product, but let's say a mid-tier of home kits for you to prepare meals for you and your family at home. And so every week you get X amount of meals, and they're all fantastic quality food and so on. So then we come down to hotels and resorts, of course, the key thing, an important leading sector in Barbados. I don't need to tell you, all of you are aware, targeting longer duration stays is something that Barbados is well positioned to do, obviously at the country level, and for you guys to figure out the nuances within your context and your company itself. But, you know, obviously make sure internet, energy reliability, work from home space, all of this, position yourself to service these potential working migrants, you know. But also we're seeing quite a lot of trends internationally where domestic tourism is doing really well. You know, Barbados has these travel bubbles that hopefully is helping that. Another thing, and I know this is happening in Barbados as well, but this kind of timeshare / condo hotel ownership structure seems really well, where, you know, you own your condo for 3 months of the year, and the remaining months it's part of the hotel pool. And then the last one, just a country that actually stood out was Singapore. And again, in the concept of an e-commerce edge, what they're doing is first of all, they've been very successful with COVID in general. And secondly, once you land there, they give you these tracing tokens that allows for very quick and efficient contact tracing. And then an idea that stuck out to me is that all their attractions, booking attractions, is done through essentially, you know, one sort of government database essentially. And this is happening even in Canada, but let's say, you know, you want to go to XYZ attraction. This system is going to segregate so that it automatically spaces, rather than you have a rush hour, it spaces out where your tourists or your customers show up. And so it's nice for the business because it's a constant flow and you're not overwhelmed. And then of course it's nice for the consumer because it's a very peaceful and you have this entire attraction for yourself to an extent. So I'll leave it there, as I know we've given you a lot of information. And with that said, thank you all for listening, and I'll pass it on to Carla. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Francois and Scott. Lots of great takeaways that we all need to consider. We hope that some of these will resonate with you, our audience, as we all continue to adjust to this very unique time. More importantly, we hope you feel inspired to take action. So I am seeing some questions in the chat, but before we get to those, we'd like to address the questions that a few of you submitted via email. The first one is for Jean-Francois. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to the government and or members of the business community on how they should move forward in the next year?
Well, so I'll give you two bits of advice. The first is understanding that, nobody is out of the woods globally, and that it is, going to still be a bit of a challenge for at least the first part of the year to return to normal. But return to normal will occur. I think the best piece of advice is to not despair. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but the reality is that we are turning the corner. It's just a matter of time, and we might need to adjust policies here and there a little bit, but like I have every reason to believe that we are, turning the corner in a pretty substantial way, and that will, the seas and the skies and everything will part in short order. The second is, it's a bit of a longer term thing, which is, what this has revealed globally is that macroeconomic policies really, really matter. And the governments need to have the ability to respond. And therefore that you need to build up safety cushions. You need to run good policy so that when you've got these terrible events, and the Caribbean, quite honestly, experiences a little bit more than others because of the weather. But when you have these terrible events, that you've got an ability to draw down on your credibility, draw down on your fiscal resources, use your central bank to help, pull you back up to where you want to be. And that's going to be a challenge for every government, not just Barbados. Every government in the world is going to have to think about this in very concrete terms next few years, just to make sure that we're ready for whatever comes next.
No, you're very right. You're very right, Jean-Francois. I think it's really important to see that, as you said, it's going to turn the corner, but the importance of working together and globally how it's impacting us all. We have another question, and this one is for you, Scott. What impact, if any, do you think the results of the US elections will have on the Caribbean?
Okay. No, that's a good question. I mean, JF did address that a bit, and so my thoughts are fairly similar. But just from a high level, going into this, our general view from our analyst teams and support teams, where there wasn't really much of an expected difference between, like in the long term, there wasn't much of an expected difference between Republicans and Democrats for the economy. Of course, it's very different personalities in the two people and so on. But ultimately, the key aspects that differ in policy is that the Democrats, so let's say before Trump, corporate tax in the States was 35%. After Trump's cuts, it was 21%. It was really, really low. And the Democrats are saying we're going to raise it to 28. So obviously that takes money out of the pockets of businesses. But their goal was to offset that by a bigger stimulus package than the Republicans. And net, we really just didn't think there was going to be much of a difference in that. And then to add on to JF's comments, I think in particular for a country like Barbados, as there's all this activity happening or discussion at least around green energy, if the Democrats are one of their key running policies is to help get that business off the ground in the States. So I would assume that would create some kind of economies of scale for Barbados as they try to achieve the same thing.
Okay, I totally agree with you there. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take one more question before they go to the chat. Jeff, this is for you. What differences, if any, do you see between Spanish Caribbean tourism to Mexico, Dominican Republic versus countries in the English Caribbean like Barbados?
I think it's largely a question of development. In talking to, going to the points that Scott raised, one of the advantages, and I really do think there's an opportunity here to fundamentally change the, one part of the business model on tourism side, which is kind of these longer stay tourisms, given the availability of working from home, given the fact that we know going forward that we will be able to, we would be encouraged, or we have no choice but to work from home much more frequently than we have been going into this. It's quite possible that you have tourists take advantage of infrastructure in the more developed Caribbean countries like your own, internet and safety and all this kind of stuff, to set up shop and say take a month vacation, and 2 weeks of those are working from your hotel room or your residence, and 2 weeks are holidays, and that I think positions the English-speaking Caribbean a little bit better off than the Spanish-speaking Caribbean and even Mexico for that matter.
Yeah, I think we are seeing the benefits of it with the longer stay. And given, as we're all seeing with the pandemic, that it's, yes, things are improving, but it's going to take some time. I think we are well positioned, and I think the government really has been actively marketing, and it's really hopefully continuing and will continue to pay off for us. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to, thanks again for that, we're going to go to the questions in the chat. This is just a reminder for everyone. Once your question is selected, we'll unmute your mic so you can speak. So we have a question here from Tony Gibbs. So Tony, your mic's going to be unmuted so you can speak.
What has caused the disconnect between the stock indices and economic activity? You see the stock indices going up with very modest and not robust economic activity in the same markets where the stock indices are rising.
I can take a crack at that, Tony. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The first is that equity markets and markets in general are very forward-looking, right? So they look to the future and they figure out, we see the rebound coming and we're going to start pricing that into financial assets now. You saw that very clearly a few weeks ago when news of the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, came around. It's not that the vaccine was going to come into production immediately and that we would see things turn around immediately. Obviously, this was something that was going to happen sometime in 2021, but markets brought that forward right away, and you got a lift from that. So that's one of the factors. So you think there's a rebound coming, markets price that in before the rebound is actually there, and that could even occur in a period of economic weakness, right? It's all about where the path is from here. The other, and this is a very important consideration as well, is there is, as I said, a lot of savings out there, in part because governments have been throwing money at households and firms. Central banks have been flooding markets with liquidity, so interest rates are really, really low. So that's a powerful combination for markets, right? You got people that have a lot of savings, and they're basically not earning anything on them. So what's the alternative from an investment perspective? You want to park your money in a very low interest rate bearing instrument, which is a perfectly sensible investment strategy. Or do you have a little bit more preference for risk and invest in equity markets that, stocks, some of which have dividends, which probably pay more than what you're earning on an instrument, or you invest in equity markets in general. So you're seeing those two things kind of work pretty powerfully over actually, quite honestly, last 6 months, right? Because even markets started turning around even when we're still in pretty deep funk because of these factors. And other factors as well here and there, but I think those are the two kind of main drivers of why markets seem to be doing well, have been doing well in an environment where we're all worried about our life.
Yes. We thank you very much for that, Jean-Francois. We have actually another question from Tony, but I will let Scott take this. So Tony, you can go ahead and ask your question.
During the pandemic, people lost their jobs. So where did the money come from to increase their savings?
So yeah, let me just take that quickly. So that's government money, right? It's basically governments running big deficits, passing on that money into households. So one of the charts that I showed in my presentation was, and again, this is true in Canada and other countries, labor income actually fell in the second quarter. So the amount of money that folks were earning from their job fell, as you would expect. A lot of people out of work, a lot less money going into bank accounts from working. But government support was so generous that it completely overwhelmed that. So as a result, household income, which is what you earn from work and what you earn from the government, if the government's giving you money because you're working or not, that aspect of it, the government transfer part, completely swamped the decline in work-related income. And that's true in Canada, it's true in the US, it's true in Europe. So it's basically a transfer from government into personal bank accounts.
Thanks very much for that, Jean-Francois. We have another question here and this one is for Scott. Once a vaccine is rolled out worldwide, what do you think travel will look like?
It's going to take a little time, as Jeff is saying, that, okay, we have 250 odd vaccines that are in process of getting approved. 3 of which have gone through the final stages and are actually approved. So, you know, you have to figure out licensing and manufacturing and distribution and all that. I think in general, though, what's going to happen, and again, JF would have indicated some of this stuff, is that when you have this drawdown as you have, you know, like a V, when the recovery comes and you have X amount of months, in this case, let's say you got almost a year or more of people that haven't been able to travel in the way that they wanted. So when that becomes, when that's released, it's almost like a slingshot. And so, you know, we've seen like housing starts and mortgage applications and car purchases and boats, what JF mentioned, have all overshot where it was in February. And so I have to think that there's a portion of the world that's going to have this pent-up demand, desire to travel, that once this starts normalizing, you're going to get, you know what I mean? You're going to get a burst first, and then it will taper back down to some sort of muted thing before it finds its equilibrium. But I think once the problem is gone, I think you get a burst of activity, and then a normalization after that is genuinely my view.
Yeah, I do think that's some very good advice, and I think that's a good, in terms of your perspective, Scott, because I really think that we're starting to see some of it, because people that are coming out, and then as you say, when then, you know, it's better with the vaccine, you would have more and more people coming out. So I think we are really well positioned, and I think Barbados has been doing a lot, as you both have mentioned. And right now, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat, so we will wrap things up. I really want to thank Jean-Francois and Scott, and you, our guests, for taking the time to join us this afternoon. These are very interesting times, but for sure, I see lots of opportunity ahead for businesses here in Barbados. I think a lot of the things that both Jean-Francois and Scott covered really resonated with me, especially in terms of a lot of the things, in terms of what the restaurants are doing, what the companies are doing here in Barbados, utilizing some of the things that they're seeing that are being done overseas. We do have cases where a lot of times people are looking for other opportunities, and we see some businesses that are thriving, that have been quicker to go to market for some of the things in terms of digitalization, and even our government's looking to reduce checks and different things. So I think someone told me this, and I think the entire COVID experience has accelerated a lot of stuff in terms of globally. I think we've maybe advanced another 10 years by a lot of things that have happened around the world, and shifting, and the governments doing what they need to do, and realizing that it is necessary in order to really protect the environment and what we need to do, but then we still need to function, and we still need to return to some level of normalcy. And so definitely in terms of the new Caribbean economy and I think, you know, this is a positive in what's happening, and we're looking forward to really turning the corner and seeing things improve. So I want to thank everybody again for your time. That's it for today. So take care, everyone, and stay safe, and happy Independence, Barbados. So thanks again, everyone, for joining.